As we begin our study of the cardiovascular system, let's first make sure that we understand what cardiovascular refers to. So cardio is always going to refer to heart, and vascular refers to the blood vessels and the blood that is contained within them. So blood vessels, we have large arteries and smaller arteries, and even smaller ones that we call arterioles. Those small arterioles lead into teeny tiny little capillary beds where we exchange things between the blood and body tissues. Those capillaries then flow into small little veins that we call venules that then become larger veins as many of those small venules merge together and veins bring blood back into the heart. Most cells in a body can't move around to get the things that they need, such as oxygen and nutrients. They can't move to the urinary system or into the intestine or to the lungs to eliminate waste products such as carbon dioxide and other cellular debris waste. So instead, all of these needs are met by the fluids of the body, primarily the blood and the interstitial fluid. So interstitial fluid is just the fluid around body cells, but the blood is a liquid connective tissue matrix. So blood has a liquid component called plasma, and then there are cells, or what we call formed elements, that are in that plasma. So blood is a liquid connective tissue. The fluid matrix is plasma, and within that we have cells and cell fragments. So here you can see a blood vessel, and of course it's going to be filled with blood. Now you notice the plasma here is very clear, or sort of, I shouldn't say clear, but sort of straw colored, sort of a funny looking yellow color. The red of your blood comes from the color of your erythrocytes, because there's so many of them that we'll see when we start looking at the abundance of these cells. So your erythrocytes carry respiratory gases. You also have cells that are called leukocytes, what we commonly call white blood cells. Those are going to be part of your immune system, and then there are tiny little cell fragments that are not really cells at all, and those are the platelets. Before we start looking at the different things we find in blood and the roles of blood, let's examine just a little bit the physical characteristics of blood. So we've all cut our finger or had some type of injury, and we've seen blood. Blood is more viscous or thicker than water, and it feels sort of sticky. The reason that it feels sort of sticky is because there are a lot of sugars that are transported in the blood out to body tissues. The temperature of the blood is about 38 degrees Celsius or 100.4 or so degrees Fahrenheit, so it's about 1 degree or so higher than oral temperature or rectal temperature, which we can measure. The reason for that is fluid from metabolic activities, or the heat from metabolic activities, is carried in the fluid of the blood. We can get rid of that heat through sweating, or we can just distribute that heat throughout the body to maintain temperature. The pH of blood ranges from 7.35 to 7.45 with an average of about 7.4. So think back to what you know about pH and what you learned in your Anatomy 1 class. Remember, 7.0 was a neutral pH, which meant something is not an acid, nor is it a base. So anything that was below 7.0 was known to be acidic, and everything above 7.0, we call that alkaline or basic. So you can see here that blood with an average pH of 7.4 is a little bit on the alkaline side. Your blood accounts for about 8% of body weight, with a volume of about 5 to 6 liters, or about 1.5 gallons, in an average-sized adult male. Usually a little bit less, somewhere between 4 to 5 liters, or 1.2 gallons, in the average-sized adult female. There are several hormones and negative feedback and blood pressure and the things that are in the blood, so osmotic pressure. All of this helps to maintain blood volume, as we'll see as we continue to look at that, or as we continue to study the cardiovascular system. The color of blood ranges from scarlet, or sort of bright red, to a dull red, or even somewhat of a more maroon color, and this is based on the amount of oxygen. So the brighter red, the more oxygen carried in the blood. The darker the blood, the less oxygen is being carried in the blood at that particular time. Blood has three general functions. It transports oxygen from the lungs out to body cells. That oxygen is used to make ATP, and a byproduct of that production of ATP is carbon dioxide. So body cells produce carbon dioxide, the blood picks that up and then transports that back to the lungs so we can exhale and get rid of it. The blood also carries nutrients from the digestive system out to body cells, carries hormones from endocrine glands out to body cells. The blood transports heat and waste products to various organs so that those waste products can be eliminated from the body. Circulating blood helps maintain homeostasis of all body fluids. It helps to regulate pH. It helps to adjust body temperature. Blood carries a lot of proteins and a lot of electrolytes that help to maintain a certain osmotic pressure that influences the content of body cells and of the blood itself. So blood regulates. Blood also protects us. It can clot or become very thick and gel-like, and that protects us against losing excess blood from the cardiovascular system when we've had an injury. But also there are white blood cells, leukocytes, that protect the body against disease by carrying out phagocytosis. So phagocytes are cells that you can think of them as eaters. So to phagocytize means to eat. So phagocytes clean up cellular debris, help to destroy bacteria and certain viruses that could cause us to become sick. There are several types of blood proteins, which include antibodies that are a part of the immune system, interferons that interfere with DNA of viral and bacterial replication, and complement proteins that all help to protect the body against disease as a part of that immune system. So blood transports, regulates, and protects. Whole blood has two components: the blood plasma, which is a watery liquid that contains dissolved substances, and formed elements, which are the cells and the cell fragments. So if a sample of blood is centrifuged or spun in a small little test tube or any type of tube, the cells, which are heavier, they're more dense, will sink to the bottom of the tube, and the plasma, which is less dense, will form a layer on top. So you can see here in this image that about 45% of blood volume is the formed elements, and about 55% is the blood plasma. When the formed elements are removed from the blood, you're left with a sort of yellowy straw-colored liquid called plasma. The plasma is about 91-92% water, and the rest made up of solutes, most of which are proteins, which include albumins, which are very small little proteins that help to maintain osmotic pressure of the blood. There are globulins and fibrinogens. The fibrinogen is an inactive clotting factor. Some of those globulins are antibodies, which are a component of the immune system. Other than those proteins, the plasma also has other solutes, such as electrolytes and nutrients, enzymes and hormones and gases and waste products. So it's not just a fluid matrix. There's a lot of stuff dissolved in that plasma. The formed elements include the three components that we mentioned earlier: the red blood cells, the white blood cells, and the platelets. So the red blood cells, or erythrocytes, transport oxygen from the lungs out to body cells and also carry some of the carbon dioxide from body cells back to the lungs. The white blood cells, or leukocytes, protect the body from invading pathogens or other foreign substances. There are several types of white blood cells that we'll see in just a little bit. Each type of those white blood cells, though, contributes in its own special way to the way that it defends the body. So certain types of white blood cells have certain types of jobs. If you think of the white blood cells in the immune system as an army or a military group, each type of cell has a specific job. So they protect against invaders that could come in and cause damage in a particular way. The platelets, which are the other part of the formed elements, are not really cells, but they're tiny fragments of cells. They release chemicals that help promote blood clotting when blood vessels are damaged. The platelets may also be called thrombocytes. So when we look at the percentage of total blood volume that's occupied by red blood cells, we call that hematocrit. So the hematocrit is usually about 40 to 45%, with the average being about 42%. For adult males, it can be a little bit higher, and for females, a little bit lower. Testosterone is a hormone that's much higher in concentration in the males than in females, and it stimulates the synthesis of a hormone called erythropoietin. Erythropoietin stimulates the production of red blood cells. So more testosterone means more red blood cells, which means the hematocrit is higher. Remember, hematocrit is simply the percent of the total volume that is made up of red blood cells. Lower values in women, of course, are due to lower levels of testosterone, but also because during our reproductive years, we do lose excess volume sometimes of blood during menstruation. Now remember, hematocrit is what percentage of this total volume is made up of red blood cells. So if you have a significant drop in hematocrit, that could indicate that you have an anemic condition going on, which can be caused by a decreased number of red blood cells. On the other hand, there's a condition called polycythemia. Let's think about that word for a moment. Poly means many, cyte means cell, emia is condition of the blood. So many cells in the blood. So polycythemia is when the percentage of red blood cells is abnormally high, so the hematocrit may be higher. That's going to raise the viscosity of the blood, make it much more thicker, which increases the resistance within the vessels, and the heart has to pump harder to get that thicker blood out to body tissues. And of course that can contribute to high blood pressure or increased risk of stroke. We'll talk about some of the ways that polycythemia can occur when we move on further in this topic. Another thing that I wanted to mention here was dehydration. Dehydration can also cause polycythemia, because remember, we're looking at what percentage of the total blood volume is occupied by those red blood cells. So if you are dehydrated, you're losing plasma, right? Because your cells are going to be losing water, your blood's going to try to replenish that in your tissues, so plasma, fluid, water will be taken from the blood. So there's less plasma that will increase in a total volume how much of that volume is made up of those cells. And the final thing, when we're looking at centrifuged blood that has separated, we have about 55%, remember, made up of the plasma. Around 40 to 45% of the percentage will be red blood cells, and that leaves us with this sort of fuzzy looking little white area between the two. That is called the buffy coat, and that's where your white blood cells and your platelets will accumulate when that blood is spun. So remember, your erythrocytes, your red blood cells, are the heaviest, so they're going to sink to the bottom. Your plasma is the lightest, so it will be at the top, and the buffy coat is between the two. A quick little summary of blood. Remember, it's about 8% of total body weight. Whole blood is made up of plasma, about 55% of blood, In that plasma, about 91 to 92% of it is composed of water, another 7% or so of the proteins, and here are some examples of those proteins we mentioned, and the other solutes dissolved in the plasma are electrolytes, nutrients, gases, hormones, and waste products. So we've got the plasma and then the formed elements. Here you can see all of the formed elements, okay? Included in those formed elements, we have somewhere between 150 to 400,000 platelets per microliter. A microliter is one millionth of a liter. Okay, so in a liter, you have 1,000 milliliters and 1 million microliters. In that same amount of blood, you'll have somewhere, depending on body size and overall health and several other conditions, usually between 4,500 and 11,000 white blood cells, and your white blood cells are composed of 5 different types that we'll see, the most abundant of which are your eosinophils, then your lymphocytes, your monocytes, your eosinophils, and your basophils. So from the most abundant to the least abundant. Your silly memory trick on this, if you look at the first letter, never let monkeys eat bananas. Most abundant down to least abundant. And then the last thing that we have in the blood, of course, that we talked about were the erythrocytes, which are usually averages about 4.5, 4.8 to 5.5, 5.6, 5.8 million cells per microliter. Yep, I said million.